Tonight, we travel back to a long medieval winter, a time of quiet nights, fading firelight, and simple lives lived slowly in the cold. Settle in, breathe gently, and let this story carry you into rest. Winter did not arrive all at once. In medieval Europe, there was no single morning when people woke and declared that winter had begun. There were no calendars on the walls of simple homes, no forecasts, no warnings. Instead, winter arrived slowly, so slowly that it was almost unnoticed at first. It began with the air. In the early mornings, the air felt heavier than before. Breath lingered just a little longer. The ground stayed damp beneath warm boots. Mist rested quietly over fields and narrow paths, refusing to lift even as the sun rose. People did not speak of winter yet. They simply felt something changing. Days shortened, not suddenly, but gently. Light faded earlier in the afternoon. Shadows stretched longer across the village green. The warmth of the sun weakened. As though it were growing tired, life continued at its usual pace. Farmers walked familiar paths. Animals were guided back into shelters a little earlier than before. Wood was gathered, not urgently, but steadily. There was no panic, only habit. The people of the medieval village had lived through many winters before. They did not fear the cold when it first appeared. They respected it. By late autumn, the sounds of the village softened. Children played closer to home. Tools struck wood and stone with slower rhythm. Conversations grew shorter as breath became precious in the cooling air. Inside the village, nothing dramatic happened. No bells rang. No announcements were made. There was only the quiet understanding that colder days were coming. At dusk, smoke began to rise earlier from chimneys. Thin gray lines curled upward into the darkening sky. The scent of burning wood drifted gently through the air, familiar and comforting. Homes were small, but they felt closer now. Walls seemed to draw people inward. Doorways framed the warmth inside, while the world beyond slowly lost its color. As night fell, the sky deepened into shades of gray and blue. Stars appeared earlier. The moon lingered longer. Inside their homes, families settled into the evening with little ceremony. There was no rush to finish the day. Winter encouraged patience. People sat quietly near the hearth. The fire did not roar. It glowed. Its light danced softly across wooden walls and warm floors. Faces appeared calm, thoughtful, untroubled. This was how winter began. Not with storms, not with snow, but with silence. In medieval times, silence was not something to be feared. It was part of life. As fields rested, so did people. Work slowed. Movement became measured. Energy was saved for the weeks ahead. The cold had not yet taken hold, but it was near. Villagers noticed small signs. Water in shallow bowls felt colder at dawn. Animals huddled closer together. The wind changed direction, carrying sharper edges. Still, there was no urgency. Winter was not an enemy to be defeated. It was a season to be endured. People understood this deeply. They had no way to escape the cold. No way to shut it out completely. Instead, they learned to live alongside it. As the sun dipped below the horizon earlier each day, the rhythm of life adjusted naturally. Evenings grew longer. Voices softened. Movement slowed. Candles were used sparingly. Firelight became the center of the room. Outside, the village grew quieter with each passing night. Footsteps faded sooner. Doors closed earlier. The world settled into stillness. The earth itself seemed to rest. Fields lay empty. Paths hardened under the cooling air. Trees stood bare and patient, waiting. Inside the homes, there was warmth, though modest. Not the warmth of comfort, but the warmth of survival. People wrapped themselves in simple clothing. Layers were added slowly, carefully. Nothing was wasted. Each piece of cloth, each log of wood, each moment of daylight mattered. The first truly cold nights arrived without announcement. There was no sudden change, only the quiet realization that the air no longer softened by morning. Breath lingered longer indoors. Fires burned a little brighter. Still, life remained calm. Medieval people were accustomed to waiting. Waiting for seasons. Waiting for light. Waiting for warmth. They did not rush winter away. They accepted it. As darkness stretched longer across the land, the village learned to move inward. Inward, toward fire. Toward family. Toward rest. Outside, the wind whispered through bare branches. Inside, the crackle of fire offered reassurance. This was not yet the heart of winter, but it was the doorway. And as winter slowly claimed the land, the people of medieval Europe prepared themselves. Not with urgency, not with fear, but with quiet endurance. They had done this before, and they would do it again. And so, as the nights grew longer and the air colder, the village settled into the season. One slow evening at a time, before the cold truly settled in. There was a time of quiet preparation. It was not a season of urgency. No one rushed. No one spoke loudly about what was coming. Instead, people prepared in the same way they always had. Slowly, carefully, and without drawing much attention to it. In medieval villages, preparation did not happen all at once. It unfolded over many days, woven gently into daily routines. A bundle of firewood carried in the afternoon. A loose stone pressed back into place along a wall. A draft noticed near a doorway and quietly blocked with cloth or straw. These small acts did not feel dramatic. They felt familiar. People had learned over generations that winter did not reward panic. It rewarded patience. As the air cooled, the first signs of preparation appeared near the edges of the village. Wood piles grew slowly, log by log. Not tall, not impressive, just enough. Branches were trimmed and stacked. Fallen wood was gathered from the forest floor. Nothing fresh was cut unless it was needed. Each piece of wood mattered. Inside the homes, attention turned to the walls. Cracks were filled with mud or straw. Cloth was hung where wind slipped through unseen gaps. Doors were checked and adjusted, sometimes just by placing a stone against them. These homes were never truly warm, but they could be made less cold. People did not expect comfort. They expected survival. Food was prepared with the same quiet care. Grain was stored in sacks and clay jars. Vegetables were dried or buried in cool earth. What could not be preserved was eaten sooner without waste. Meals became simpler as autumn faded. Not because food was scarce yet, but because habits changed. People ate what was easy, what was warm, what required little effort. The act of preparation itself was calm. There was no fear in these movements, only memory. Older villagers remembered winters that lingered. Younger ones learned by watching. Children observed without being taught directly. This was how knowledge passed, through quiet repetition. Animals, too, were part of the preparation. Livestock were brought closer to home. Shelters were reinforced. Straw was laid thick on cold ground. The warmth of animals mattered, not just for survival, but for comfort. At night, their presence soft a silence. As daylight shortened, people adjusted without discussion. Work began earlier. Evening slowed. There was no sense of loss in this change. Only acceptance. Winter meant fewer choices. And fewer choices brought simplicity. In the afternoons, smoke drifted steadily from chimneys. Not thick, not urgent, just enough to warm hands and calm minds. Inside, fires were kept low. Fuel was never wasted. Flames were encouraged, not fed. People sat close to the hearth, not speaking much, listening instead. The crackle of wood, the shifting of embers, the soft sounds of breathing in a cooling room. Preparation was not only physical, it was mental. Winter demanded endurance, and endurance began with stillness. People learned to move less, to speak less, to save strength without thinking about it. The village itself seemed to slow. Paths emptied earlier in the day. Footsteps grew rare after sunset. The world felt smaller, but not unsafe. There was comfort in routine. Each morning followed the same pattern. Each evening closed gently, without resistance. Clothing was checked and repaired. Loose seams were tightened. Worn fabric was layered, not replaced. Warmth came from layers, not from luxury. Nothing was new. Nothing was wasted. As nights cooled further, people lingered indoors a little longer. Stories were told softly, not for entertainment, but to pass the time. Words were unimportant. The sound of voices mattered more. Children listened until sleep came naturally. Adults sat quietly, eyes resting on the fire. Outside, the wind tested the village. It slipped through trees and fields, searching for weakness. Inside, homes held steady, not because they were strong, but because they were prepared. Winter had not yet shown its full face. Snow had not yet fallen. Ice had not yet formed, but everyone knew it would. And so, without worry, without haste, the people continued preparing. They gathered. They repaired. They waited. This waiting was not empty. It was filled with small actions. Quiet moments and steady breathing. By the time the cold truly arrived, nothing dramatic would change. The village would already be ready, and as autumn finally loosened its grip, and the air sharpened with each passing night, the people rested in the knowledge that they had done what they could. Winter would come. It always did, but preparation, slow, patient, and quiet, would carry them through. As the cold deepened, life moved inward. The medieval home became more than a place to sleep. It became shelter. It became protection. It became the center of winter life. These homes were simple. They were built from what the land provided. Wood from nearby forests, stone from the ground beneath their feet, mud and straw pressed carefully into walls. There was nothing decorative about them. Nothing unnecessary. Every part of the house existed for a reason. Walls were thick, not for beauty, but to slow the wind. Roofs were low, so warmth would not drift upward and disappear. Ceilings pressed down gently, holding heat close to the people beneath them. Windows were small, sometimes no more than narrow openings. They let in light, but little else. Cold air struggled to enter. Warmth struggled to escape. Doors were heavy. They creaked when opened. They closed with weight and finality. Once inside, the outside world felt distant. The floor was hard earth or packed clay. Cold underfoot, unforgiving. Straw was spread thickly, softening the chill and quieting footsteps. People moved slowly indoors. There was no need to hurry. The house encouraged stillness. At the center of the home was the hearth. Not large, not impressive. But constant. Fire was kept alive through careful attention. Not allowed to grow wild. Not allowed to fade. The hearth was never ignored. Its warmth reached only a short distance. But that distance mattered. People gathered close. Benches, stools, and simple beds were placed nearby. Heat did not fill the room. It hovered, and that was enough. Smoke lingered beneath the roof, finding its way out through small openings. The air was thick, but familiar. People breathed it without complaint. It smelled of wood, of earth, of winter. Furniture was minimal. A table, a few benches, chests that held clothing and tools. Everything had its place. Nothing was moved without reason. In winter, space was precious. Families stayed close together, not out of necessity alone, but for warmth. Bodies shared heat. Presents shared comfort. Children slept near parents. Elders rested closest to the fire. Animals were sometimes brought inside. Not all, but some. Their breath warmed the air. Their quiet movements filled the silence. The home felt alive, even as the world outside grew still. At night, the house changed. Darkness pressed against the walls. Wind tested the roof and door. Inside, firelight flickered gently, casting slow shadows. These shadows were not frightening. They were familiar companions. People listened. To the wind outside, to the fire within, to the steady rhythm of breathing. Homes were not places of escape. They were places of endurance. No one expected comfort. Comfort was rare, but there was safety. The walls did their work. The roof held. The fire burned. That was enough. When snow eventually came, it gathered quietly against the sides of houses. It softened sound. It dimmed the world. Inside, the home felt even more removed from the cold. Light became precious. Candles were used sparingly. Firelight did most of the work. Faces appeared calm and thoughtful. In the glow. Time moved differently indoors. Hours passed without notice. Days blurred gently together. The house did not change, and that steadiness brought peace. During the coldest days, people stayed inside longer. Tasks were done slowly, carefully. There was no rush to finish anything. Winter did not reward speed. It rewarded patience. The medieval home was not built to impress. It was built to last. Not forever. Just long enough to hold warmth. Long enough to keep the wind out. Long enough to survive another winter. People trusted their homes, not blindly, but quietly. They knew every sound the house made, every creak, every shift. When the wind howled, they listened calmly. The house had endured this before. And so had they. As night deepened, people settled into their places. The fire dimmed. Voices faded. Sleep came slowly, but it came, wrapped in layers of cloth and shared warmth. The people rested. Outside, the cold continued its work. Inside, the medieval home stood steady, a simple shelter, a quiet refuge, holding life gently against the long winter night. In winter, everything returned to the fire, not suddenly, not dramatically, but naturally. As the cold pressed in from all sides, the hearth became the quiet center of the medieval home. Fire was not treated as something powerful or dangerous. It was treated as something familiar, something that needed care. Each morning, someone tended the embers. Not with urgency, with patience. Ash was brushed aside gently. A small piece of wood was placed just right. The flame responded slowly, as if waking from sleep. There was no rush to make the fire large. A strong flame wasted fuel. A steady flame lasted. People understood this without explanation. Throughout the day, the fire remained modest. It warmed hands. It softened the cold air close to the floor. It offered comfort without excess. The fire was never left alone for long. Someone always watched it. Not closely. Just enough. This quiet attention was part of life. In the afternoon, as light faded, the fire became more important. Shadows lengthened along the walls. The room grew dim. The outside world slowly disappeared. Firelight replaced daylight without protest. Its glow was gentle. Its movement slow and steady. Faces appeared softer in the warm light. Voices dropped naturally. People sat closer together, not because they were told to, but because warmth gathered there. The fire shaped the room. Tools leaned nearby. Benches faced inward. Sleeping places stayed close. The hearth was not only for warmth. It was for cooking, for light, for comfort. A pot rested quietly above the flame. Steam rose slowly. Nothing boiled quickly. Meals took time. Food warmed gradually, filling the room with simple scents. There was no hurry to eat. Winter taught people to slow down. As evening deepened, the fire spoke softly. Wood shifted. Embers settled. Ash fell with a faint sound. These noises were familiar, reassuring. They reminded everyone that the fire was alive, and that it would keep burning through the night. Fuel was added carefully. Never too much, never too little. People knew how long each piece of wood would last. They learned this by watching, by remembering. Firelight danced across the walls, creating patterns that changed slowly. No one watched them closely. They were simply there. Children grew sleepy near the warmth. Adults rested quietly. The fire asked for nothing more than attention. At night, when the cold pressed hardest, the fire held its place. Wind rattled doors and walls. The roof creaked softly. Inside, the hearth remained steady. Its warmth did not fight the cold. It resisted it. That resistance was enough. People slept close to the fire, wrapped in layers of cloth and shared breath. Sometimes they woke briefly, just to check the flame. A small movement. A piece of wood adjusted. Then sleep returned. Fire was not feared in these homes. It was trusted that people understood its moods. They knew when it needed help. They knew when to leave it alone. In the quiet hours before dawn, the fire burned low, its glow barely visible, its warmth faint but present. This was intentional. A low fire lasted longer. It carried warmth into the morning. When the first pale light appeared, someone stirred. The fire was greeted again. Embers were coaxed back to life. That another day began. Throughout winter, this rhythm repeated. Fire, rest, silence. Day after day, night after night, the hearth never changed. And that constancy mattered. In a season when the world felt uncertain, the fire remained predictable. It warmed without surprise. It asked for care, not devotion. People did not gather around the fire to be entertained. They gathered to endure. And in that endurance, they found calm. The fire did not promise comfort, but it offered presence. In the deepest winter nights, when cold pressed hardest against the walls, the fire held the center of the home, quietly, faithfully, and as the flames flickered and settled, the people rested, knowing that as long as the fire burned, they were not alone in the cold. In winter, the body learned before the mind did. Before anyone spoke of the cold, the body felt it. Hands stiffened in the morning air. Feet cooled quickly on the earthen floor. Breath turned visible without effort. People did not complain. They adjusted. Clothing in medieval times was simple. There were no closets full of choices. No garments meant only for style. Every piece of clothing served a purpose. Layers were the answer to the cold. Not thick garments, but many thin ones. A linen shirt close to the skin, wool worn over it. Another layer added when the air grew sharper. Each layer trapped warmth. Each one mattered. Clothes were worn for long periods. They were not changed often in winter. Removing layers meant losing heat. Cleanliness followed the rhythm of the season. In warmer months, washing was easier. In winter, warmth mattered more. The body accepted this without resistance. Wool was especially important. It was heavy, rough, sometimes uncomfortable, but it held warmth even when damp. That made it valuable. Cloaks were wrapped tightly around shoulders. Hoods were pulled low. Scarves were wound slowly around the neck. Nothing was tied carelessly. Every knot mattered. Shoes were simple and thin, often worn with extra layers of cloth inside. Straw was sometimes added for insulation. Feet were cold, but they remained protected. Hands were covered when possible. When not, they were kept close to the body, tucked beneath cloaks, held near the fire. Clothing was repaired often. Small tiers were stitched closed. Loose seams were tightened. Nothing was thrown away. Old garments became new layers. Worn fabrics still held warmth. People understood that clothing was not separate from survival. It was part of it. At night, clothing stayed on. There were no separate garments for sleeping. What was worn during the day was worn in bed. Sometimes additional layers were added. A cloak pulled tighter, a blanket shared. The body adjusted to this routine. Sleep came slowly in the cold, but it came. Breathing deepened. Muscles relaxed. The body learned how to rest without full warmth. Over time, people became accustomed to the cold. Not immune to it, but familiar with it. They knew the difference between discomfort and danger, and they lived in the space between. Movement during winter was careful. Sudden motion wasted energy. Stillness preserved it. People moved less, but when they moved, they did so with purpose. Clothing followed the same rule. Nothing unnecessary. Nothing excessive. The body itself changed with the season. Appetite shifted. Sleep patterns adjusted. Strength was conserved. Winter was not a time for effort. It was a time for endurance. People listened to their bodies closely. Cold taught awareness. A shiver meant it was time to move closer to the fire. Stiff fingers meant it was time to rest. These signals were understood instinctively. There was no struggle against the cold. Only cooperation. Children learned this early. They watched adults layer clothing carefully. They copied movements without being told. This knowledge passed quietly. The body, wrapped in layers of cloth, became part of the shelter. Clothing worked with the home, with the fire, with shared warmth. Nothing stood alone. By the deepest part of winter, the body no longer resisted the cold. It expected it. Cold mornings were met with calm. Cold nights were accepted. People woke slowly. They moved deliberately. Winter shaped their pace, wrapped in wool and warm fabric. They lived gently within the season. The cold remained, but it did not overwhelm, because the body, layer by layer, had learned how to endure. In winter, food was not about pleasure. It was about warmth. And it was about endurance. Medieval people did not think of meals as something exciting. They thought of them as something necessary. When the cold settled in, eating became slower, quieter, more deliberate. There were no long lists of ingredients. No choices to make. Food was simple, and that simplicity brought calm. Most meals began the same way. A pot was placed near the fire, not directly over the flames, but close enough to warm slowly. Water was added. Grain followed. Sometimes vegetables. Nothing was rushed. Soups and stews were common in winter. They required little effort. They stretched what food there was. As the pot warmed, steam rose gently into the room. It carried a soft scent, earthy, familiar. The warmth of the steam mattered almost as much as the food itself. People gathered closer as it rose. Hands extended toward the heat. Breathing slowed. Cooking took time, and that time was welcome. Winter allowed no hurry. Bread was eaten daily. Dark bread. Dense bread. The kind that filled the body and stayed with it. It was broken slowly. Chewed carefully. Eating quickly wasted energy. Eating slowly preserved it. Meat was less common in winter meals. When it appeared, it was used sparingly. Small pieces added to stew. Flavor spread through the whole pot. Nothing was wasted. Fat was valuable. It added warmth. It added strength. Every bite mattered. People ate until they felt steady, not full. Too much food made the body heavy. Too little made it weak. Balance was learned through experience. Meals were shared, not because it was tradition, but because it made sense. Shared food warmed more than one body. Shared meals brought quiet comfort. There was little conversation while eating, not out of sadness, out of focus. Eating in winter required attention. After meals, people rested. Digestion took energy. Stillness helped. The fire continued its quiet work. The pot was moved aside. Ash settled. Leftovers were kept carefully. Nothing spoiled quickly in the cold. But nothing was forgotten. Hunger was always nearby in medieval life. But winter did not always mean starvation. It meant caution. People learned to listen to their bodies. Warmth after eating was a sign of success. Cold creeping back too quickly meant adjustments were needed. Another layer of clothing. A closer seat by the fire. Food and warmth worked together. Children were fed first. Elders were watched closely, not because rules demanded it, but because care was natural. Winter sharpened awareness of one another. As days passed, meals grew even simpler. What remained was used. What was gone was not replaced. There was no frustration in this. Only acceptance. Winter was not a time of abundance. It was a time of careful use. The act of eating became quiet ritual. The pot, the fire, the steam. Each evening followed a similar rhythm. And in that repetition, there was comfort. At night, after the final meal, people felt heavier. Not from excess, but from warmth. Sleep came more easily with a full stomach, even a modest one. The body relaxed. Muscles soft. Food had done its work. Outside, the cold continued. Inside, the warmth lingered. And as the fire dimmed and the house settled, the people rested, knowing that simple food, prepared slowly, would help carry them through another winter night. As winter deepened, time itself seemed to change. Days grew shorter, not suddenly, but steadily. Each morning arrived a little later. Each evening settled in a little sooner. Light became something people noticed, something they paid attention to. In medieval life, daylight mattered. When the sun rose, work began. When it set, work ended. There were no clocks to argue with, no lights to extend the day. When darkness came, it was accepted. By midwinter, the sun lingered low in the sky. Its warmth was faint, its presence brief. People felt this change quietly. Mornings were slow. The cold held on longer. The fire was slow to give up its warmth. People woke without hurry. There was no reason to rush. The day ahead was short. Tasks were chosen carefully. Only what was necessary was done. Movement was measured. Energy was saved. As afternoon arrived, shadows stretched across the village. They moved quickly now, faster than before. Light slipped away. By the time people noticed, it was already evening. Darkness did not fall suddenly. It settled, softly, gently. One moment there was light enough to see. The next, the world dimmed into quiet shapes and outlines. Inside the homes, firelight took over. The hearth glowed earlier each day. Candles were lit sparingly. Shadows returned to the walls. The night felt longer now. Not threatening, just vast. People learned to live within it. Winter nights were not filled with activity. They were filled with waiting. Waiting by the fire. Waiting for sleep. Waiting for morning. Voices softened naturally. Movement slowed. There was no need to speak much. The long nights invited stillness. Outside, the village rested. Paths disappeared into darkness. Fields lay silent. Trees stood motionless beneath the cold sky. Snow, when it came, made everything quieter. Sound faded. Distance softened. Inside, The sense of time stretched on hours passed without notice. The fire burned. The room stayed warm enough. People sat, listened, breathed. Sometimes stories were told. Short ones. Familiar ones. Not to entertain, but to fill the silence gently. Often. There were no stories at all. Just the sound of fire. The shifting of wood. The faint wind outside. Sleep did not come quickly during the longest nights. But it came eventually. People rested in stages. Dozing, waking, resting again. There was no pressure to sleep deeply. Rest was enough. Children drifted off first, their breathing steady and slow. Adults followed when the fire dimmed further. Darkness wrapped the house, completely. Outside, the cold continued its quiet work. Inside, the home held steady. The night passed slowly. At some point, without being noticed, the cold loosened slightly. The fire faded to embers. Then, faint light returned. Morning arrived gently, as it always did. People stirred, not refreshed, but rested enough. The long night was over, and then the cycle began again. Another short day. Another long night. Winter taught people to live without hurry. Without urgency. Time moved differently now, and within that slower rhythm, the people endured, one long night at a time. Night came early now, earlier than anyone remembered from summer. In winter, darkness was not an interruption. It was the natural state of the world. By the time evening arrived, the village had already slowed. Doors were closed. Animals were settled. Fires were burning low and steady. Sleep in medieval winter was not a single long event. It was a quiet process. People did not rush towards sleep. They moved into it slowly. Inside the home, the air was warm enough. Not warm, but safe. The walls held the heat carefully. The roof blocked the wind. The fire was the center of everything. Its glow softened the darkness. Its warmth shaped the night. As the flames settled, so did the people. They sat close together, not always touching, but always near. Winter nights were not meant for activity. They were meant for rest. Bodies understood this instinctively. After the evening meal, movement became minimal. Hands rested in laps. Voices faded into murmurs. Eyes grew heavy without effort. Children were the first to sleep. They lay on straw mattresses, wrapped in thick wool blankets. Sometimes 2 or 3 shared the same space. Heat was precious. Closeness mattered. Their breathing slowed, even, soft. Adults followed gradually. No one watched the time. No one needed to. The fire told them when it was ready. As the flames lowered, sleep came closer. People lay down fully clothed. Layers stayed on through the night. Wool tunics, socks, sometimes hats. There was no concept of sleeping attire. Only warmth. The bed was simple. A wooden frame, a sack of straw or hay. Blankets passed down through years. It was enough. The body adjusted. Sleep arrived gently, not deep at first. Just rest. During winter, sleep came in parts. People slept for a few hours, then woke. This was normal, expected. The fire had dimmed. The room was quiet. Some lay still, listening. Others sat up briefly, added a piece of wood to the embers, adjusted a blanket. There was no anxiety in waking. No urgency. The night was long. There was time. After a while, sleep returned. Deeper now. Dreams came slowly. Simple dreams. Familiar images. Fields, homes, warmth. Outside. The cold pressed gently against the walls. Wind moved across the village without resistance. Snow rested quietly on rooftops. Inside. The house held steady. The second sleep lasted longer. Breathing deepened. Muscles loosened. The body conserved energy. This rhythm, sleep, wake, sleep again, was part of winter survival. It allowed people to stay warm, to remain alert if needed, to rest fully. Toward the deepest part of the night, everything became still. Even the fire stopped moving. Only embers remained. A quiet red glow. The room was dark now. Completely. Darkness did not frighten people. They lived with it every night. It was familiar. Wrapped in blankets, bodies shared warmth. The cold did not enter. At some point, without warning, sleep softened again. People drifted. Not fully awake. Not fully asleep. Time passed unnoticed. Eventually, a faint light appeared. Not sunlight. Just the idea of it. The sky shifted slightly. Darkness thinned. Morning was beginning. People did not wake suddenly. They stirred slowly. Adjusted their position. Took a deeper breath. The cold returned gently. A reminder that the fire was low. Someone rose quietly. Careful not to wake the others. They moved to the hearth. Added wood. Watched the flames return. Warmth spread again. Another night had passed. Another night survived. Winter sleep was not about comfort. It was about endurance. And yet, within that endurance, there was peace. The body learned. The mind rested. Night after night. This rhythm continued. Sleep. Wake. Sleep again. Through the longest season. And slowly, without being noticed, winter moved forward. Before dawn, the world was at its quietest. In medieval winter. Morning did not begin with light. It began with cold. Long before the sun appeared, the cold returned to the house. The fire had faded into ash. The warmth from the night slowly slipped away. People did not wake suddenly. They drifted upward from sleep, gently, as if the body itself sensed the change. Breath became visible in the air. Blankets were pulled closer. Movement remained slow. This moment, between night and morning, was familiar. It happened every day in winter. Someone stirred first. Usually the same person. Not because they wanted to wake, but because responsibility called quietly. A father, a mother, an older child. They opened their eyes in the darkness. Listened. The house was silent. Everyone else still asleep. They rose carefully, placing feet on the cold floor. The cold was sharp now. It reminded them to move slowly. No sudden movements. No wasted energy. They walked toward the hearth. Ashes rested quietly where fire had once burned. A faint warmth still lingered beneath. They knelt. Added a small piece of wood. Blew gently. A glow appeared. Then another. The fire returned slowly, as it always did. As the flames grew, warmth followed. Not much at first. Just enough. The person stayed close to the fire. Hands extended. Breathing steady. This early hour was not rushed. There was no need to hurry. Outside, The village remained asleep. Snow rested undisturbed. Paths were hidden. The sky was still dark. Time moved differently before dawn. Minutes stretched. Silence deepened. The fire crackled softly. Inside the house, others began to stir. A child shifted beneath blankets. An adult took a deeper breath. No one spoke. There was no reason to. This quiet belonged to the morning, alone. As warmth spread, the house slowly returned to life. Someone sat up. Someone adjusted their clothing, still wrapped in layers. They waited. Waiting was part of winter. Eventually, a faint light appeared through cracks in the door or the small window. Not sunlight, just a change. The darkness softened. Morning was approaching. People gathered near the fire. Hands warmed. Faces relaxed. The cold no longer pressed so hard. Breakfast was simple. Always simple. Bread from the previous day. Sometimes dipped in warm liquid. Sometimes eaten plain. No one complained. The body accepted what was given. Eating was quiet, unhurried. Outside work would come later, when light allowed, when the cold eased slightly. For now, this moment mattered. The space between sleep and labor. Children stayed close to the fire. Adults planned silently. No words were needed. Everyone knew what the day would bring. Another short day. Another long night. But dawn still mattered. It marked survival. Another night passed. Another morning reached. As the sky brightened, movement increased. Cloaks were adjusted. Tools gathered. Doors opened carefully. Cold air entered briefly. Then the door closed again. The day had begun, but the memory of the night stayed. The warmth of shared sleep. The quiet hours. The slow waking. Winter mornings taught patience. They taught restraint. They taught people to listen to their bodies. No one rushed into the day. The cold would not allow it. And so, each morning began the same way. Slowly, quietly, with care. This rhythm repeated, day after day, throughout the winter. And within that rhythm, life continued. Not loudly, not quickly, but steadily. Winter days were short, but the cold lasted all day. In medieval times, keeping warm was not a comfort. It was a daily task. From the moment people woke, they thought about warmth. Not consciously, but instinctively. Clothing was the first defense. Layers were added slowly. Wool over linen, thick garments over thin ones. Nothing was wasted. Clothes were worn until they could no longer be repaired. Holes were patched. Edges were reinforced. Wool mattered most. It held heat. It resisted dampness. It stayed warm even when wet. People understood this without explanation. They wrapped themselves carefully. Scarves around the neck. Hoods pulled low. Hands covered when possible. Movement stayed slow. Moving too quickly caused sweat. Sweat led to cold. So people learned balance. Work was steady. Never rushed. Inside the home. The fire was guarded. Not allowed to grow too large. Not allowed to fade completely. Wood was precious. Only enough was used to keep the room livable. People sat close to the hearth. They shared its warmth. Animals were brought inside when possible. Chickens, sometimes goats. Their body heat mattered. The smell was familiar. Not pleasant. Not unpleasant. Just part of winter. Walls were covered with hanging cloths. Old blankets, woven tapestries, not for beauty, but for insulation. Floors were layered with straw. It trapped warmth, softened the cold. During the coldest days, windows were sealed. Cloth, wooden shutters. Light was sacrificed for. Warmth, darkness was accepted. Food also helped fight the cold. Meals were heavier in winter. Thick soups, grains, bread, warm. Food warmed the body from inside. People ate slowly. After eating, they stayed still, letting warmth settle. Work resumed only when necessary. Outside tasks were brief. Chopping wood, checking animals. Faces covered, breath controlled. Cold air burned the lungs if rushed. So people moved with care. Inside again, hands were warmed by the fire. The day passed quietly. There was no struggle against the cold. Only cooperation. As evening came, extra layers returned. People prepared for another long night. The fire was built slightly higher. Just enough. Sleeping spaces were arranged for warmth. More blankets. Closer sleeping. Children placed between adults. Heat was shared. Bodies adjusted naturally. Cold days taught people awareness. Of their bodies, of their limits. They learned to listen. If hands numbed, they stopped. If breath shortened, they rested. Survival depended on patience. As the coldest weeks passed, this rhythm continued. No complaints, no resistance. Just quiet adaptation. Winter did not need to be conquered. It needed to be endured. And day by day, through warmth shared and movements measured, the people endured. In winter, food was not about pleasure. It was about survival. In medieval times, people did not ask what they wanted to eat. They ate what they had. Winter meals were simple, predictable, repetitive, and that was comforting. Food brought warmth, not excitement. As winter began, families relied on what they had stored. Grain kept in sacks, dried beans, salted meat. Nothing was fresh. Nothing was wasted. Bread was the foundation of every meal. Dark bread, dense bread, baked from rye or barley. It filled the stomach. It lasted. Bread was eaten slowly, chewed carefully. Sometimes it was dipped into warm liquid. Sometimes eaten dry. It was always appreciated. Soups were common. Large pots sat near the fire. They simmered gently. Water, grain, vegetables dried from autumn. If meat was added, it was small, carefully measured. The soup was never rich, but it was warm. Warmth mattered. Eating warm food helped the body fight the cold. People understood this naturally. Meals were eaten close to the fire, hands wrapped around bowls. Steam rising slowly. No one rushed. Winter meals were quiet. Conversation was minimal. Energy was saved. Children ate what they were given. Adults did the same. There were no choices. Fat was important. Rendered animal fat. Stored carefully. It added calories. It helped bodies endure cold days. Fat was used sparingly. A small amount made a difference. Cheese appeared often. Hard cheese. Aged cheese. It lasted through winter. It required no cooking. Sometimes it was eaten with bread. Sometimes alone. It was filling. Meat was rare. Salted pork. Dried beef. Only small portions were eaten at a time. Meat was stretched across. Many meals. Every piece mattered. During the coldest days. People ate more often. Not more food, just more regularly. Small meals. Steady warmth. After eating, people stayed still. Digesting helped produce heat. Moving too soon wasted energy. Children rested near the fire. Adults sat quietly. The body adjusted. Hunger was familiar. People did not panic when food felt scarce. They knew winter demanded restraint. Food was counted mentally. How many loaves remained? How much grain was left? But this counting was calm. Winter had a rhythm, and food followed it. As days passed, meals remained the same. Repetition was reassuring. There was no surprise. Each meal meant survival continued. On some evenings, food was thinner. Soup more watery. Bread smaller. No one complained. This was expected. People learned to be content with enough. As winter slowly moved forward. Food supplies declined. But so did hunger. Bodies adapted. The stomach learned patience. Warmth mattered more than fullness. Eventually, the days began to lengthen. Very slightly, but winter food continued until spring. Eating remained careful, measured, quiet. Food did not end winter, but it carried people through it. Meal by meal, day by day. And in that steady rhythm of simple eating, life endured. Winter tested the body in quiet ways. Not suddenly, not violently, but slowly, day after day. In medieval times, people understood that winter weakened the body. Cold drained strength. Darkness lowered energy. Hunger reduced resilience. Illness was expected. Not feared. Accepted. When someone felt unwell, it was not a surprise. It was part of the season. There were no doctors nearby. No medicines as we know them today. Instead, there was rest. Rest was the first response. When the body felt heavy, movement slowed. Work was reduced. Tasks were shared. The sick were not isolated. They were kept close. Warmth mattered most. The ill stayed near the fire, wrapped in blankets, protected from drafts. Fresh air was not forced. Cold was avoided. People believed warmth helped healing. Often they were right. Food was simple. Warm liquids. Thin soups. Bread softened in broth. Eating was encouraged gently, never forced. The body took what it could. Sleep became longer. The sick slept in cycles, waking briefly, sleeping again. No one expected quick recovery. Time was allowed. Children were watched closely. If a child fell ill, they were kept warm at all times. Held close, fed carefully. Adults took turns sitting nearby. Silence filled the house. Voices stayed low. Movement stayed slow. The house adjusted itself around illness. Illness did not stop winter life. It slowed it. Those who felt well worked a little more. Those who felt weak rested more. This balance kept families moving forward. There was no blame in being sick. The cold affected everyone. Some days, someone did not improve. In those moments, people stayed calm. Fear did not help. They focused on comfort, warmth, quiet, presence, being. Alone was worse than illness. So no one was left alone. Through long winter nights, someone was always awake, adding wood to the fire, checking breathing, adjusting blankets. These acts were small, but meaningful. Winter illness was endured, not fought. The body was trusted to heal slowly. Herbs were sometimes used. Simple ones. Plants dried from summer, added to warm water. Mostly for comfort. Sometimes for relief. No strong smells. No sharp tastes. Everything remained gentle. As days passed, most people recovered. Strength returned gradually. First appetite, then movement, then work. No one rushed back into labor. The body remembered winter's lesson. Rest was necessary. Those who rested survived better. Those who pushed too hard grew weaker. Winter taught patience. It taught listening. Listening to the body. Listening to fatigue. People learned when to stop. As the season continued, illness came and went. Each time, the response was the same. Warmth, rest, quiet endurance. By late winter, the body adapted. Cold felt less sharp. Darkness felt familiar. Illness became less frequent. The body adjusted to the season. Endurance was not dramatic. It was steady, one breath at a time. One night at a time. And slowly, without being noticed, winter began to loosen its hold. Winter did not end suddenly. It did not announce its departure. It loosened its grip slowly, almost without being noticed. In medieval times, people did not count the days until spring. They felt it. They felt it in the light, in the air, in their bodies. The nights were still long, but not as heavy. The cold was still present, but softer. Each morning, the sky brightened just a little earlier. Each evening, darkness waited a little longer to arrive. People noticed these changes quietly. No one celebrated. Yet. Winter was not finished, but something had shifted. The village moved through its days as it always had. Slowly, carefully. Fire still burned. Warm clothing still mattered, but the cold no longer ruled everything. During the day, the sun felt different. Not warm, but present. People paused when it touched their faces. Just for a moment. It was enough. Snow began to change. It no longer fell as often. When it did, it melted more quickly. Paths reappeared. Ground softened. Animals sensed the change first. They moved more. Ate with more energy. People followed. Work lasted slightly longer each day. Not because they forced it, but because the body allowed it. Evenings remained quiet. Winter habits did not disappear all at once. People still gathered close to the fire. Still ate simply. Still rested often. The season had taught them well. Patience remained. At night, sleep felt deeper. The cold no longer interrupted rest as often. People slept longer between waking. Dreams became lighter. There was less tension in the body. Breathing felt easier. House felt less closed in. Sometimes a window was opened briefly, just enough to let in fresh air, just enough to remind everyone that the world outside was changing. No one rushed ahead. Spring would come when it was ready. Until then, winter routines continued. Bread was still counted. Wood was still used carefully. But worry faded. The worst had passed. Children grew restless again. They moved more. Asked questions. Adults noticed this with quiet relief. Strength had returned. Illness faded into memory. The long nights no longer felt endless. One evening, someone noticed birds. Not many. Just a few. Their sound was faint, But unmistakable. No one spoke about it. They did not want to rush the moment. Winter was ending, and it deserved a calm farewell. On the final cold nights, people slept peacefully. The fire burned lower. Blankets felt less heavy. The body no longer clung to warmth with the same urgency. Morning came more easily. Light filled the room sooner. People woke without resistance. Another day survived. Another season nearly complete. Spring did not arrive with celebration. It arrived with relief. Quiet relief. And when it finally came, winter was already gone. Not defeated. Not overcome. Simply finished. The people had endured. Through cold. Through darkness. Through silence. They had rested. They had waited. And now, without effort, they moved forward. The long medieval winter was over. And the world, slowly and gently, began again.